Kind of tight back there. Good morning. Welcome on this chilly morning. I'm Nan Erbaugh, and I'm happy to welcome Annalisa Gross, one of the pastors at Beacon Heights in Fort Wayne. I want to thank Tim Ritchie Martin, and I need to thank him twice because I forgot to thank him yesterday. So thank you. Annalisa will bring us her message, and we'll be singing number 493 after her message, if you want to get ready.
I had a plan of doing a little embodied demonstration of something for you this morning, and this plan involved that I would have gotten up, and before I drove over here, I was going to get a bucket out of one of the sheds and fill it up with rocks on the farm. And to be honest, in 17 degrees, I just wasn't up for it. So I don't have my heavy bucket full of rocks, but you can picture what it would look like, if I was trying to carry this big, heavy bucket of rocks. And what I wanted to say about that is that even in this festive holiday season, I know many of us are carrying heavy burdens. And we have more reasons to feel heavily burdened than there would have been rocks in that bucket I would have been staggering around with for you this morning. Jesus invites us to lay our burdens down. Jesus invites us to live an abundant life. And as I picture what that would look like, it could be dropping that bucket and just running toward abundant life. Or it might look like a slow, thoughtful building of our burdens into something else. So tuck that away in the back of your mind, and we'll come back to it later. But first, let's turn to a very old story this morning. It's a story about the first time families were in discussion about who would live where in what we now call the Holy Land. From Genesis 13. Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no quarrel between us, nor between your herders and mine, for we are relatives. The whole land is open before us. Let us part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you take the right, I'll go left." Lot looked around and saw the fertile plains which the Jordan River watered so well everywhere. This was before God had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like the garden of God, or the land of Egypt as far as Zoar. So Lot chose the whole Jordan Valley and moved off eastward, and they parted company. Abram stayed in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. But the people of Sodom were extremely corrupt and sinful in Yahweh's sight. After Lot left, Yahweh said to Abram, "Look around you. From where you stand, look to the north and to the south, the east and the west. All the land within your sight I give to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants like the dust on the ground. If someone could count the specks of dust, only then could your descendants be numbered. Travel through the length and the width of the land which I intend to give to you." Abram took his tents and settled near the oak groves of Mamre, near Hebron. And there Abram built an altar to God. This is a nice time to be with Nan and Delora and Jean, with whom I shared the larger Earlham College campus and Bethany Seminary campus back in the early 2000s when I was a student at Earlham College and then was with Nan at Bethany Seminary. And during college, one of my best friends was Adham Rishmawi. He grew up in Beit Sahur. That's a town just a few miles from Bethlehem in the West Bank. According to tradition, Beit Sahur is where the angels and shepherds met on the first Christmas. And Adham has been on my mind extra the last few weeks during this increased violence in Israel-Palestine. A few years after we had graduated from college, I was traveling with Christian peacemaker teams in Israel-Palestine, and so I went early or stayed late, I actually don't remember now, and spent a few days with Adham and his family in Beit Sahur. And so now when I'm reading story after story of violence, most of it, of course, is in Gaza, but some in the West Bank, it's Adham, his family, and their home who are my stories that I carry in my heart, the faces that I see. Because we humans have story-size hearts. In the scripture story, Abram offers Lot the first choice. And I've been wondering, what if Lot had chosen Canaan? Would he have become the main character in the story and Abram been the minor character? And we can't know all the symbolism that the authors intended, but going east in the Old Testament, going east in the Old Testament is often a bad thing. Like after Cain kills Abel, he flees east of Eden, or when the Israelites are taken into captivity in Babylon, that's to the east. So east, even though we can believe that God is everywhere, east is like moving farther from blessing. And Lot chooses to go east. And that's just one of the ways that it seems like the biblical authors don't want us to root for Lot. He goes and puts his tents among Sodom and they're all evil. You know, we're supposed to kind of be wary of Lot, I think. And there have been stories ever since this family of families who fall apart over property, inheritance. But this family doesn't. Abram lets Lot choose first. And for now, everybody's getting along. And today, for the most part, Muslims, Christians, and Jews can agree that we are the Abrahamic faiths, descended from the faith of Abraham. But we do not to this day agree on the land and how we could share it. But back in this story, Abram and Sarai and Lot are doing fine, as far as we know. If you look at the chapter before, they move around a lot. This family moves around many times, I should say. And we know that Sarai and Lot come along for these very many moves, but we don't know how they feel about it. Family moves to this day are often for one person's calling, one person's job opportunity. And so God keeps making plans and promises with Abram. And sometimes Abram even makes some questionable decisions, like what he gets up to in Egypt. And every time, Sarai and Lot just have to pack up and move again. And I thought about when I was about 10 years old, I had this really special invitation from my dad to go canoeing together, just the two of us. And that memory, which should be happy, for me is tinged with sadness. Here's how I remember it. Nobody else in my family remembers it this way. But I remember that my dad out on that Eel River that afternoon explained that he had been asked to move to either Elgin or New Windsor. He was working with On Earth Peace. And he had been asked to move to one of those locations of Brethren. And he wondered how I would feel about moving. And we actually had moved a couple times at least in my lifetime, but I didn't remember it. All I could remember was living outside North Manchester. And the thought of starting over and whole new friends was really intimidating to me. And so I said I didn't want to move. And then a few days or weeks later, my parents said we would not be moving. And privately, I assumed it was my fault, that I was the one letting them all down, that my limitations were holding them back. And that's what I remember from that canoe trip. So maybe, as I thought about it, maybe if Abram never even asked Sarai or Lot's opinion about all these moves, maybe that's really better. Because if God tells you you're going to go anyway. So there's this part in the story of Abram where we're reminded that this is before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And I wonder what's the intent of including that sentence? I mean, probably just to say the land is still luscious and beautiful, but maybe there's also a little foreshadowing and building suspense. And remember, it helps paint the case that Lot's already making bad choices. But as I sat with the story, which ends in Abram's action of building an altar, that foreshadowing of destruction reminded me of another unintended altar. You maybe can picture it because there's a formation in Jordan that's called Lot's wife. And the story we tell about that is that as she turned to look back at her loved ones and her home, she became a pillar of salt. And even now, there is this place you can go and look at what maybe could look like a woman looking back. An unintended altar is how it strikes me today. And I think of other collective altars that we build, like along the highway when someone dies in a traffic accident, or on a sidewalk when someone has been killed in an act of violence, or even if a celebrity dies, people will bring flowers and teddy bears and things outside their home. And these are altars, memorials. These are ways of marking a place and a moment. And we're living in this era where it happens way too often that a boat full of people fleeing towards safety goes down in the sea or the ocean, and there's no way to really build an altar there. We humans have this need to mark God's presence, God's blessing, like Abram does in this story. And we also seem to need to mark the moment when we are confounded by what seems like God's punishment or God's refusal to intervene. And when I think about the UN estimates there are 110 million people living as refugees today. So when I think about those people, I feel even worse about my 10-year-old self who was afraid to move, because these 110 people, they're not moving out of adventure seeking. These are grandparents and older siblings and parents who are picking up children and any little glimmer of hope they can find and heading toward what might be safety. So my friend Adham Rishmawi from college, after we graduated from Earlham, he went on and got his master's at Columbia University. And then he went back to Beit Sahur to be with his family. And a few years later, he gave up. Even though Adham he's not who we would really think of as a refugee. He's so highly educated. His family is quite wealthy relative to most people in Palestine. And Adham said, there is no money that could give us a better quality of life in Palestine. Money is not what limits our quality of life. It's the occupation. And especially as a young man, that violence was such a threat to him that Adham has been living in Spain for, I think, the last 7 years now. And so I do know that Adham is safe from this violence, but his family is still in Beit Sahur. I was born into a family, many of you know them, stable, loving, in one of the wealthiest countries that has ever existed, with white skin. I have access to education and terrible US healthcare. Sometimes I have to stop and catch my breath when I think about how blessed I have been. And I think again about Abram. Descendants, land. Does Abram feel staggered by the weight of his blessings? He settles into the shade of an oak tree and builds an altar to the Lord. And though he is grateful, Abram isn't necessarily special. God tells him, I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. It's the same message that God tells Israel more than once, this time through the voice of the prophet Amos. Are you not like the Cushites to me? Did I not bring Israel up from the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Arameans from Kir? We humans have story-sized hearts. And these Hebrew people, or the Israelites, they star in this story that our faith cherishes, but they are not the only people that God adores. God is hoping to change the whole world through Abram's family and through the whole Israelite people, not because they're more special, but because we need a star in our story, our human story-sized hearts. It matters more for us to know one family than for me to tell you about 110 million people. The altars that we build on sidewalks or highway shoulders are the stories we need to keep telling of one person, one life, one loss. What if we had insisted on a mandatory mourning period beginning on October 7th? I have no idea how it could have been enforced. It couldn't have been. But I've been imagining it. What if we had somehow, as a planet, needed to build a memorial for every single person killed on October 7th before there could be a decision about what would happen next? And if we were building them from the stones, and again, imagine I had been brave enough to fill a bucket of stones for you today, I would have acted this out for you. What if we had built these memorials out of stones? You've seen them stacked beautifully, stone on stone. And then suddenly found that we had no stones left to throw because we'd used every one to pay tribute to someone. So when I think about Jesus inviting us to abundant life, what's on my heart these days is not that I would toss my heavy bucket and run towards abundance, but that I would take time to disburden myself with purpose, one heartache at a time, one stone at a time, one story at a time. And I can do it in my mind, picturing each of my worries as a stone and stacking them into something beautiful. It could be a prayer practice that you do with visualization. So thinking back to my college days at Earlham, many of my classmates had gone to the Ramallah Friends School in the West Bank because Earlham is also a Quaker school. And that's where these 3 young men who were just shot at in Vermont, they were all alumni from the Ramallah Friends School. And so I think about the man who chose to run out of his house towards these obviously Arab-looking men and shoot them. What if now his sentence was the one that he's probably paralyzed for life, that maybe he needs to spend the next year helping him navigate the world in a wheelchair, or maybe the requirement before you're allowed to point a gun at someone is that you need to have learned their life story. I don't know. I have all kinds of ideas that have no political possibility to be enacted. But we do have a responsibility to do something meaningful with our burdens, because we live with all of these blessings. There are days when every single one of us will be reactionary. We'll think the worst of someone. We'll think the worst of ourselves. But we have a lot more resources than that when we pause, when we remember our prayer practices, our scriptural and spiritual disciplines. We have so many blessings. Our monuments, even in the midst of so much sadness, proclaim this matters and God is present with us. This story is about so many things, and one of them is how Abram keeps saying, "Yes, I will follow," when God tells me I will go. And that is the theme of the hymn that we're going to share this morning. 493, I heard the voice of Jesus say. I want to leave you with two invitations. One is to put down enough burdens that your hands are freed up for the important work of building a more beautiful world. And the other is from that song and from our scriptures about the living water, because the heaviest burden is lighter in the water. And I think we are blessed enough to be like water for others who are struggling, to help ease the burdens that they carry. Go in peace.